Last time, when Brenna Lowell sat alone in her quiet living room, she remembered how Jackson Rourke and Riley Gateman whispered behind her door, believing her aging ears couldn't catch a thing, never knowing Paxton Hale had helped her hide a tiny microphone beneath the side table. I've always thought growing old meant learning to hold your pain with gentle hands. At 68, I've had my fair share of quiet heartbreaks, but nothing prepared me for the moment I realized people I trusted didn't think I could understand them anymore. It began on a mild Sunday afternoon. My daughter's friend, Riley Gateman, a polite young man with a restless, tech-focused mind, had stopped by to check on my Wi-Fi. He often helped me with small things around the house, never asking for anything in return. But that day, after he left, I noticed little things. A faint tick beneath the wooden side table, a new cable tucked behind the baseboard, and a strange silence from the two people who usually filled my hallway with their voices. Jackson Rourke, my late husband's godson, who had recently moved in to assist me, and Paxton Hale, my steady, soft-spoken neighbor who checked in almost every evening. I didn't confront anyone. At my age, you learn that silence is a shield. But later that night, I heard the whispering. I was sitting in my armchair, knitting the way I do when my thoughts feel heavy. The hallway light was on. Their shadows stretched thin across the floor, and even though I pretended not to notice, I could sense Jackson and Riley standing just beyond the kitchen door. Jackson kept his voice low, but it still carried. Smooth, calculated. "She won't hear us," he whispered. "She never hears anything past this wall." Riley hesitated. I could hear it in the way he moved, shifting his weight. "Still feels wrong, man. She's Brenna." A softness spread through my chest at that. Riley still cared, but his next words pierced deeper. "I just don't think we should be planning things behind her back." My needles paused mid-stitch. "Planning what behind my back?" Jackson sighed, as if tired of explaining. "Look, all I need is a few signatures. She trusts me. She won't question it. After that, she'll be comfortable, and I'll handle the rest." The rest? I sat still, heartbeat slow but heavy, like waves pushing against an old dock. This home, this little two-bedroom place with the cracked fireplace bricks and the rose-laced window. My husband built so much of it with his own hands. The idea that someone might want to take control of it. The needles slipped from my fingers, not loudly, just enough. Their whispers died instantly. I heard their steps shift, one retreating, one hovering. Riley murmured, "Did she hear that?" And Jackson responded, barely audible, "Trust me, she hears nothing." It was strange. The sting wasn't sharp or furious. It was quiet, hollow, like watching frost creep across the window of a room you used to feel warm in. I didn't move for a long time after they left the hallway. Instead, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the silence settle around me like a blanket I didn't ask for. A gentle knock came about an hour later. When I opened the door, Paxton Hale, my loyal neighbor and longtime friend, stood under the porch light. He was in his mid-70s, with kind, steady eyes that always reminded me of a calm lake. He held a small grocery bag, tea and biscuits, his usual offering. "You look tired, Brenna," he said softly. "Something on your mind?" I gave him a practice smile. "Just the usual aches." Paxton didn't push. He never does. But as he stepped inside, his gaze drifted, just for a second, to the wooden side table, the same place where the faint ticking sound lived. He knew about the microphone. We sat in the living room, two old souls sharing the kind of silence that isn't empty, but thoughtful. With a quiet voice, Paxton finally said, "Do you trust me, Bren?" I nodded, though a part of me trembled. Of course. He leaned forward slightly. "Then when you feel ready, listen to what they said. Everything was recorded. Every word." My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of truth settling in. "Paxton," I whispered, "why would Riley do something like this?" Paxton shook his head. "I don't think he meant to hurt you, but Jackson, well, he's always had his eyes on things that don't belong to him." I stared at the dim, warm glow of my living room lamp. The room felt familiar, yet different, like I had been living inside a painting, something pretty on the surface, but hiding cracks beneath. Paxton placed a comforting hand over mine. "You don't have to face this alone." I looked at him, grateful for the companionship that aging hadn't taken away. "Thank you," I murmured. "But I think I need to hear what they said. All of it." He nodded once, solemn and patient. "When you're ready, Brenna, not before." That night, after he left, I sat alone in the quiet house. The ticking under the table felt louder now. Not mechanical, but purposeful, like a heartbeat waiting to be acknowledged. And when I finally reached down, fingers brushing against the small device hidden beneath the wood, a shiver passed through me. My life had been quiet for a long time, but now I was about to hear what had been happening in the quiet, and I wasn't sure what would hurt more, their words, or the truth behind them. But as I pressed play on that tiny microphone, I had no idea the next morning would expose everything. Last time, when I pressed play on the tiny microphone Paxton Hale helped me hide beneath the side table, I remembered the sting of hearing Jackson Rourke and Riley Gateman whisper behind my kitchen door, believing my aging ears and my quiet heart would never catch the truth. There's a particular stillness that fills a house late at night, one that wraps around you like a thin blanket, fragile but familiar. As I sat with the microphone resting in my hand, I found myself drifting through memories I hadn't touched in years. Not because I forgot them, but because sometimes remembering is its own kind of ache. The lamp beside me cast a soft glow across the living room. It illuminated old picture frames, the kind that still carried dust in their corners, no matter how often I wiped them. A quiet reminder that time leaves its fingerprints everywhere. I leaned back into my chair and looked at the framed photograph closest to me. A picture of myself in my 30s, standing in my garden, a little unsure of the camera, but smiling anyway. Back then, my hands were steady, and my steps didn't rely on walls for balance. Back then, laughter came easily. But aging had introduced me to a quieter world. Not sad, just gentler. A world where I learned to sit with my own thoughts a little longer than I used to. That gentleness is exactly why the whispers behind the kitchen door had cut so deeply. As I held the microphone, I let my thoughts drift to my first days living alone. I remembered cooking soups that simmered all afternoon, the soft scent of time filling the kitchen. I remembered humming old songs under my breath and keeping the radio on low, simply to feel accompanied. That was long before Jackson Rourke came to live with me. He had arrived one rainy afternoon, suitcase in hand, coat damp from the storm. "Aunt Brenna," he had said quietly, "I just need a place for a while." He was polite, charming even, and at first I felt grateful for the company. It felt nice to have someone else in the house. Someone taller than the furniture, someone who could reach the top shelf when my shoulders grew stiff. But little signs had begun to appear. He organized my mail before I saw it. He picked up my phone calls without asking. And sometimes he stood too long by the hallway table, as if listening for something. Still, I told myself it was harmless. Age has a way of making you doubt your own unease. It wasn't until Riley Gateman started visiting more often that the tension became noticeable. Riley was different, quieter, thoughtful. When he checked my router or fixed a flickering light, he always told me exactly what he was doing. He had a softness to him, the kind that made you think he was carrying his own private worries. I remember one afternoon when he stood in my living room, staring at an old vinyl record I kept near the shelf. "You still listen to these?" he asked, voice warm. I nodded. "They make the house feel alive." He smiled, but it wasn't a full smile, just a gentle twitch of the lips, as though he understood loneliness in a way most young people didn't. That moment had stayed with me. Maybe because it was one of the rare times someone really looked at me, not as someone aging, but as someone still living. But tonight, as the recording replayed in my mind, I wondered if Riley's kindness had been genuine, or if it was part of something bigger. The thought pressed into my chest like a slow bruise. A soft rustle broke through my thoughts. I turned, expecting shadows, but it was only Paxton Hale's porch light flickering across the window again. He often stayed up late, reading or tinkering with small woodworking projects, the same way he had for years. Paxton wasn't much for talking about himself, but he had always been steady in my life, the kind of neighbor who'd shovel my walkway in winter without leaving a note, the kind who'd bring tea bags when he noticed I was running low. I trusted him not because he asked for it, but because he earned it quietly, through years of small kindnesses. Earlier that evening, his voice had been patient when he said, "You don't have to listen right away, Brenna. You deserve to take your time." But I knew time wouldn't soften this truth. I looked down at the microphone again. Its tiny LED light blinked, faint but steady, like a heartbeat. I pressed play. The soft crackling sound returned. Then Jackson's voice, smooth and low. "She won't catch on. She never asks questions." My knitting needles lay untouched beside me. My heartbeat slowed. Riley's voice followed, uncertain, anxious. "I didn't come here for this, Jackson. I thought you wanted to help her." A pause, then an answer that chilled the room. "I am helping her. She just doesn't need to know how." I lowered the microphone, palms damp. The house around me felt smaller suddenly. Not unsafe, but aware, as if the walls, the windows, even the old carpet had been holding their breath along with me. Outside, a car drove by slowly, its headlights tracing a soft glow across my curtains. I watched the light fade and whispered into the quiet, "Something's wrong. Something's been wrong." My words trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of finally admitting what I'd tried so hard to ignore. I placed the microphone back on the table gently. If the whispers were only the beginning, then tomorrow would bring a storm I hadn't prepared for. And yet, a small part of me, some stubborn flicker deep inside, felt ready, or at least willing. Sometimes life forces you to open your eyes, even when they're tired. But I didn't know that by the time morning light touched my window, someone in this house would slip and reveal a truth I never expected to hear. Last time, when I replayed the microphone recording and heard Jackson Rourke whisper that people like her don't ask questions, I felt something inside me shift, quietly, painfully, because I finally understood the distance I had been sensing for months. Morning light touched the curtains in thin, soft lines, like someone drawing pale strokes across the room. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time before standing. My knees ached, the way they always did after a night of little sleep. But it wasn't the ache that slowed me. It was the decision I knew I had to make. I reached for my robe, the faded blue one I'd had for years, and slipped it over my shoulders. As I walked down the hallway, the house felt unusually still, the kind of stillness that makes you wonder if it knows something you don't. When I stepped into the living room, Paxton Hale was already standing near the window, hands folded patiently behind his back. He must have let himself in with the spare key I'd given him, something he'd never done without knocking first. His expression softened when he saw me. "Brenna," he murmured, "you didn't sleep." I shook my head. "No, I didn't." He studied me for a moment, then motioned gently toward the small envelope sitting on my coffee table. "I brought something. You might want to see it before you decide anything." My heart quickened. I moved closer, picking up the envelope with careful fingers. Inside were several papers, not new, but handled enough times to show faint creases. "Paxton," I whispered, "what is this?" "A few weeks ago," he said, his voice soft but steady, "I noticed Jackson taking your mail from the box before you had a chance to check it. I didn't want to assume anything wrong, but something didn't feel right, so I collected these when they arrived again." The papers weren't threatening. They were quiet things: insurance statements, loan offers, home equity pamphlets, but tucked behind them was something that made my breath catch: a draft contract, my name, my address, and a signature line, blank but waiting. "Jackson was preparing something," Paxton continued. "I didn't understand it fully, but I knew it wasn't mine to confront. It had to be yours." My fingertips trembled over the page. "He wanted control," I murmured. Paxton nodded gently. "Or access." The room felt smaller again, not suffocating, just heavy. Before I could speak, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Slow, familiar, rehearsed. Jackson appeared in the doorway, his expression calm but guarded. "You're up early, Aunt Brenna," he said, as though we were discussing the weather. Paxton stepped slightly closer to me, not protectively, just reassuringly. I looked at Jackson, and for the first time, I didn't see the boy who used to visit on holidays. I saw the man who whispered in my hallway, unaware that my quietness wasn't ignorance. It was patience. "Jackson," I said softly, "we need to talk." He smiled politely. "Of course. Is everything all right?" I held the microphone gently in my hand, the tiny device that had given me truth when my eyes refused to see it. "I heard everything," I said. "Last night." A subtle stiffness passed through Jackson's jaw, barely visible, but unmistakable. "Everything?" he asked slowly. I nodded. "The whispers behind my kitchen door, the things you planned for me to sign, the way you spoke about me as if I wasn't here." Silence settled over the room like dust. Riley Gateman appeared behind him then, hesitant, eyes lowered. He stood near the doorway, hands tangled nervously together. "Brenna," Riley said quietly, I need to say something." Jackson shot him a warning glance, but Riley didn't retreat this time. Instead, he stepped forward, keeping his voice soft but steady. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was helping with something harmless. I didn't know what Jackson was planning until it was too late. And when I realized, you put a microphone in my living room," I finished for him. He swallowed. "I admit it, but I only did that to keep track of what was happening, to make sure you weren't being used. I should have come to you. I'm sorry." His remorse felt genuine, not crafted. Jackson exhaled sharply, not angry, but irritated in a quiet, controlled way. "This is unnecessary. Aunt Brenna, you're misunderstanding." I held up the contract, then explained this. He paused. A faint, almost weary sigh escaped him. "Aunt Brenna," he said gently, "I was trying to help you manage things. You've been alone for a long time. You thought I wouldn't notice," I said, voice barely above a whisper. The words weren't sharp, they weren't loud, they were simply true. Jackson's eyes flickered, not guilt but calculation. He stepped a little closer, softening his tone. "You can trust me. You always have." Paxton moved subtly, positioning himself beside me. "Trust is earned, Jackson," he said calmly, "not taken." For the first time, Jackson's controlled mask cracked just enough to reveal a flicker of irritation. He looked at Paxton with the expression of a man whose plans were beginning to slip. I took a slow breath. "Jackson," I murmured, "if you wanted to help me, you could have just talked to me. I may be older, but I'm still here. I'm still capable. You don't need to take my voice away to protect me." A long, aching pause filled the room. Finally, Riley stepped forward, voice trembling. "He wasn't helping you, Brenna. He was setting things up to take over." Jackson's head snapped toward him, not violently, just sharply. But Riley didn't back down this time. "I heard everything too," he said softly. The quiet in the room thickened. Even the clock on the wall seemed to slow. I looked at Jackson, really looked, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the child he once was. The boy who used to laugh in my backyard, who used to ask for extra pie at Thanksgiving. But I also saw the man who whispered in my hallway, planning things he thought I would never hear. "I need the truth," I whispered. "All of it." Jackson's gaze dropped. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but not innocent. "You heard enough." And that was the moment I realized something. He wasn't done. Not yet. But I didn't know the next discovery wouldn't come from a microphone. It would come from inside Jackson's own room, something he never meant for me to see. Last time, when Riley Gateman revealed that Jackson Rourke had been planning to take advantage of my trust, I held the microphone tightly, realizing the whispers I thought were harmless were a map of deception, and that the next discovery would come from inside Jackson's own room. The morning sun filtered weakly through the living room curtains, casting long shadows that stretched across the floorboards like quiet warnings. I stood near the side table where the microphone still rested, its small presence a reminder that silence doesn't always mean ignorance. Paxton Hale was already seated in the armchair, eyes calm but alert. Riley stood close to the doorway, hands folded neatly in front of him. I could sense the tension between them and Jackson Rourke, who lingered near the hallway, trying to appear unbothered but betraying a faint unease. It was time. "Jackson," I began softly, letting my voice carry steady conviction rather than anger. "I need you to show me everything." He hesitated, a flash of surprise crossing his features, but he stepped toward the hallway, leading us to his room, a small, orderly space with the faint smell of cedar from a wooden dresser. I noticed immediately a stack of papers on his desk. Folders, letters, and some official-looking documents lay neatly arranged. He tried to gesture dismissively. "They're nothing," he said quietly, but the tone lacked authority. Paxton shook his head gently. "Brenna deserves the truth." I stepped closer, my soft eyes scanning the documents. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding what had been planned. There were forms for power of attorney, bank authorizations, and property transfers, all carefully drafted, all waiting for my signature that I never gave. Riley's eyes widened, and he whispered, This is exactly what I feared." I took a deep breath. Jackson? Why? You've known me for years. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Jackson's jaw tightened. He didn't answer immediately. The quiet in the room grew dense, almost suffocating, but I let it linger. Finally, he spoke, voice low and controlled. I thought I was helping you manage things. I didn't want you to worry. I didn't think you'd understand the complexities. I looked at him steadily. Helping me doesn't mean taking my voice away and pretending I'm incapable. Do you think kindness means control? His eyes flickered, as if the weight of my words finally penetrated the wall he had built around himself. Paxton stepped forward, his calm presence steadying the room. Truth doesn't need manipulation, Jackson. People respect what is given freely, not what is forced under the guise of care. Riley added softly, and I should have come to Brenna earlier. I thought I was protecting her, but hiding things. It only made the consequences heavier. Jackson lowered his gaze. He opened his mouth, then paused, as if considering whether to justify his actions or simply surrender to the undeniable. I folded my hands in front of me, the microphone lying quietly on the dresser. Do you see, Jackson? Every whisper, every secret move, it didn't protect me. It only isolated me, and isolation is a fragile thing. You underestimated it. A long silence followed. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, listening. Then, slowly, Jackson picked up the forms, one by one, and placed them neatly into a folder. He handed it to me with a faint, almost apologetic bow of his head. It's yours now. Whatever you want to do with it, do it. I took the folder, my fingers brushing the crisp papers. A quiet sense of justice settled in. Not loud or vengeful, but deep and certain. Riley exhaled, relief soft in his voice. It's done. She sees it now, Jackson, and she knows the truth. Paxton placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Sometimes truth doesn't shout. It simply exists, waiting to be recognized. I nodded, eyes glistening. Not tears of anger, but of clarity. The plan that had tried to diminish me had failed. The whispers, the hidden intentions, they had all been exposed through patience, observation, and quiet courage. Jackson remained still, a quiet shame settling over him. Not humiliation forced upon him, but the natural consequence of seeing someone you intended to mislead confront the truth with dignity. I took a deep breath, voice soft but steady. I hope you learn from this, Jackson, not because I wanted to punish you, but because the heart sees more than the ears ever will. Riley moved closer, offering me a reassuring nod. We're here, Brenna. You're not alone. Paxton's eyes met mine, warm and calm. And you've reminded everyone that honesty matters more than control. The sunlight in the room grew slightly stronger, falling on the documents now in my hands. They no longer held power over me. They were simply paper. What mattered was trust, and that had been reclaimed. I felt a quiet strength settle into my chest. It wasn't triumphant. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply the gentle satisfaction of truth prevailing. And as I looked around the room at the three people who had shaped this moment, I realized something tender. Even in a house filled with whispers, patience, observation, and quiet courage could make all the difference. But I had no idea that the final secret, the one hiding in plain sight, would surface the very next morning, changing everything once more. Last time, when Jackson Rourke quietly handed me the folders he had hidden, I felt the weight of truth settle into the room, knowing that whispers and hidden plans could never overpower patience, observation, and quiet courage. Weeks had passed since that morning. The house, once heavy with quiet tension, now carried a gentle calm. I would sit in the living room and hear only the soft ticking of the clock and the occasional hum of Riley Gateman fixing something small around the house. Paxton Hale still checked in with his quiet, steady presence, and even Jackson, though he was no longer plotting, he seemed to understand the boundaries of honesty. Guided by the natural lesson he had quietly received, I found myself wandering into the garden one morning. The roses I had tended for decades were in bloom, their scent sweet and familiar. Sunlight touched the petals like warm brushstrokes, reminding me of mornings long ago when life had seemed simpler. I ran my fingers over the leaves, remembering that even delicate things can endure if cared for gently. It was here, in the quiet moments among the flowers, that I realized how much had changed. Not because of anger, confrontation, or punishment, but because the truth had been allowed to surface naturally. I felt a dignity that comes from standing firm in one's integrity and a quiet strength that grows when patience meets observation. Back inside, I spent time in the kitchen, preparing a small breakfast for myself. The familiar smells of cinnamon and fresh bread filled the air, comforting and ordinary. Riley appeared with a basket of groceries, quietly setting it down without fuss. He didn't speak of the past. There was no need. His presence alone, calm and respectful, was enough. Paxton entered next, holding a small envelope. He didn't need to explain. I knew it contained another little gesture of reassurance, a note, perhaps, or something he had found to make life easier for me. I smiled softly, realizing that people like him don't need accolades or recognition. They simply show up, quietly, persistently, and honestly. Even Jackson approached eventually. He stood at the doorway, hesitant, yet not fearful. I saw in his eyes the faint weight of humility, the recognition that trust can be broken, but also restored when treated with care and respect. "Brenna," he said softly, voice careful. I understand now. I see what I did wrong." I nodded, choosing not to respond with judgment. "The lesson isn't just yours, Jackson. It belongs to anyone who forgets that respect and honesty matter more than control." He lingered for a moment, then left the room quietly. There was no dramatic exit, no sharp words, just a calm acceptance that consequences, even subtle ones, have their own weight. I wandered back to the living room, pausing to look at the microphone that had once revealed whispers meant to undermine me. It no longer felt like a tool of fear. Instead, it was a reminder. Observation, patience, and gentle awareness can uncover truths that are hidden, but only if you allow yourself to listen. I sat in my favorite armchair and looked around the house. The photographs on the walls seemed brighter, more alive. Each frame held memories, not of betrayal or planning, but of laughter, of quiet love, and moments worth preserving. I realized then that life isn't about controlling others or fearing their intentions. It's about steady presence, thoughtful action, and allowing integrity to guide decisions. In my garden, in my kitchen, in every quiet corner of this home, I understood that dignity is its own reward, and honesty, soft, unwavering honesty, can heal even the deepest of cracks. I took a slow breath and whispered softly to myself, "Even in a house full of whispers, the heart knows the truth." And as the afternoon sun cast a warm glow across the floor, I thought of those who had tried to manipulate and those who had quietly helped. I realized that life is full of lessons, not always taught loudly, but often felt in the silence between words. I smiled gently and placed the microphone back in its drawer. It had served its purpose. The house was calm, my trust restored, and I had learned what I needed to know. Patience and vigilance don't just protect, They nurture. Even now, when Riley adjusts a lamp or Paxton brings a basket of freshly baked bread, I am reminded that kindness is a living thing. It flourishes when given freely, and it survives quietly, far longer than whispers ever could. And yet, as I settled into the soft chair by the window, sunlight spilling over my knitting basket, I asked myself a question that lingered in the warmth of the day. If patience and quiet courage can uncover the deepest truths, then what truths have we missed, simply by refusing to listen? Sometimes the heart hears more than the ears ever will, and perhaps the real lesson is learning to trust that quiet knowing even when whispers surround us.